All right, back for another live stream. Let me check something on my phone. The um, the video on my laptop and my phone, they don't sync up exactly, so I just want to make sure it starts when I intend it to start. Yeah, it looks like it did. Okay, so it's Saturday, May 3rd, 2025. And this is our usual time. I put in the title today, Reason is Good, Faith is Bad. This is another attempt at trying to generate some interest. Maybe people who are interested in that topic will come across this title and decide to tune in and maybe call in. So that was the point of that. But as usual, it's really open to any topics that people want to discuss. That's just kind of a hook to try to bait some interest. But we can talk about anything you want to raise in the chat. It's fair game. All right. All right. See, we got our first chat of the day from Grant. Welcome, Grant. I think you might be a first-time chatter. You ask, what are your thoughts on consciousness and how do you prove reason is valuable? Okay. Thoughts on consciousness. Well, I think it exists for one thing. So that's a very basic thing to say about it. I'm not an eliminativist, as some people are about consciousness. There is a fringe of people in academic philosophy, even among academic philosophers, at least these days, it's very uncommon for them to just deny the existence of consciousness totally. They might try to reduce it to something else. They might say consciousness uh, um, just is a brain process. It just is firings of C fibers. I think that was an example that was often used back in the mid 20th century, certain kind of neural firings. And you might think that that amounts to a denial of its existence if you say consciousness just is the brain or some kind of brain process. And I think that might be right, that it is a way of denying it. But I think these days, 21st century, at least when I was in grad school, which was 21st century, that um, philosophers are more open to the existence of consciousness, and they they might say there's I think it's a dual perspective on the same thing. There's like an introspective perspective on something, and then there's an extrospective perspective on something, and those two perspectives are opaque to each other. So you don't know. Like by analogy, you can use your senses to know things in two different ways. Like you might see something to be a curved shape, like a ball, and then you can feel it. You can also feel the curvature of something. And if you were blind and you could only feel the shape of something being curved, you might not know that if your sight were suddenly restored and you saw that same object, but you weren't touching it, you weren't feeling it anymore, you might not know by sight that it was curved. So that might require some further experience to grasp. So that's I'm trying to explain what I mean when I say two senses are opaque to each other. So there might be other cases where you By the way, I don't know if that's actually true. Like if you were blind and then your sight were suddenly restored, would you be able to tell just by looking at a round object that it it was the same thing that you would feel as a round object when you did not have sight? I'm not sure what the answer is to that, but um, you can imagine, at least thinking about this, that there are cases where the senses are opaque to each other, where you wouldn't know that they're the same thing, and then other cases where you would know. Um, anyways, this is maybe a digression of the main thing Grant was asking about, but I do think consciousness is real. I don't think it's reducible to something physical or material. At least I don't think there are good arguments for that, even though arguments have been offered, certainly. I actually wrote my dissertation, my PhD dissertation on this subject. It's called A Critique of the Scientific Case for Physicalism. So many philosophers think that science offers good reasons to accept physicalism, or it used to be called materialism more often. The idea that consciousness is, or the mind is just material. There's really no difference between um, it and the brain. I guess at most it's just a difference of perspective, um, rather than a difference in the thing that you have a perspective on. That is the object of perception. There's one object, but you can consider it from two different angles, an introspective kind of angle or a first person angle, and then a extrospective or a third person angle or point of view. It's put in different ways. And allegedly, they say science backs this view up, but I don't think the arguments that allegedly appeal to science are good. So I tend to think that consciousness is a different sort of thing, or at least a different sort of property, whether to call it a thing or an entity or a property or a process, exactly what its status is metaphysically, like in terms of the basic categories of being. Aristotle had this idea of categories of being. He wrote a treatise called The Categories, or at least it was later called that by whoever compiled his works. I don't know if he used that term, um, but in his work, The Categories, he lays out, I think, 10 different basic categories of being, and or maybe substance would be another term for it. He has what's called primary substance and secondary substance, and then there are more derivative forms of being, um, actions, relationships. So you might think the primary is entities, and then something secondary or derivative of that is actions. Like you can't have running without some entity that runs, right? So the action of running is derivative, relative to, say, a rabbit or a person who runs. The person is more fundamental. It's a more fundamental sort of being, but then there are these derivative or non-fundamental sorts of beings, which are like actions, attributes, like the color of something. You can't just have redness. It has to be a red something, a red bean of some kind, like a red brick. So, anyways, whether you consider consciousness some sort of entity or process or attributes, I don't think it's reducible. Now, that term itself, reducible, is there's a lot that could be said about that and what exactly that means. But just to try to keep it simple, I'll just say for now, I don't think consciousness is reducible to something material or physical. So you might call me a dualist. That's a term that's often used in uh, philosophy, academic philosophy. But then that breaks down into like substance dualists, property dualists, which relates to the sort of thing I was just talking about. So a substance dualist would treat um, consciousness and matter as two distinct substances, each of which can exist without the other. So like it's very common on a religious view for someone to hold that the soul can survive the death of the body. So Descartes, I think, is a famous proponent of this view. He's often called a substance dualist. He thought there were basically two kinds of being. There's a material being and mental being. Um, and the soul, on his view, he was a Catholic. He thought the soul would survive the death of the body. So you don't need a body to have a soul. You can have a soul just kind of free floating, independent of the body. But you also don't need a so soul doesn't need a body. A body doesn't need a soul. You can also just have body by itself, like a rock, right? That would be some material or bodily sort of thing that doesn't have a soul. Um, so he thought soul and body were the two basic kinds of being. So he was a substance dualist. But you might also be a property dualist and think, no, the the soul or the consciousness or the mind aspect of a person is just an aspect. It's not some distinct thing or being that can be separated out. It's just some kind of property that emerges when matter gets together in a certain kind of way. But if you rearrange the matter, if you crush someone's skull, then that property of being conscious is gone. Um, so you need to have a material component in order to have consciousness. However, that doesn't mean that consciousness is somehow nothing but material or physical. Um, it's some distinct sort of property. Um, so that's the at least some of what I'll say about the property dualist view. And I guess if I had to choose a view now, I would go with that one. If I'm going to try to put my position on consciousness into academic terminology, I guess I would say I'm a property dualist, or at least I think that's a view that seems plausible to me. And I think there's a good case to be made that that's the sort of view Ayn Rand advocates, although she doesn't use that term herself. But I think, given things she says at various places about the mind, you might infer that she holds a property dualist sort of view, at least in certain passages. Um, and let's see. So going back to Grant here, there was another part of his question. I'm, I guess I could say a lot more about consciousness, but I don't want to go on too long about that. I want to leave time for other people to ask questions about other things, although no one else has chimed in yet. Um, I guess I could go longer on this, but let me look at the second part of Grant's question. He says, how do you prove reason is valuable? Well, how do you prove reason is valuable? Yeah, I guess one, you could imagine what life would be like without it if you didn't have reason, and maybe consider the fact that reason is what enables us to have this conversation right now, in that we used our reason as scientists and have used their reason to discover laws of physics and chemistry and electronics and so forth, so that we can, and then inventors and industrialists, they use their reasons to use the knowledge that scientists have discovered to create technology and then sell it to a market of people. So all kinds of reasoning has gone into uh, us being able to have this conversation now over I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of miles we might be apart, but reason has made this amazing, miraculous, although it's not miraculous because it's causal. But you might think it's miraculous if you don't understand it all. Um, but reason has enabled us to do amazing things, go to the moon, um, uh, medicine, life-saving medicine, uh, and animals don't have these things. Animals don't have reason. Right? They have a sensory faculty like human beings do, but they don't have a rational faculty, and rational rationality is what enables humans to do all the amazing things that they can do. So I guess that if you think about that, like what reason has enabled us as humans distinctly to do, in contrast to other species who don't have reason, I guess that would be one way of proving the value of reason. Okay, so I see we got some more people coming in. Um, Everyone who's here, thanks for being here. Thanks for the likes. I see we got a few likes on the stream. That helps promote it in the algorithm, so maybe it'll push it out to more people to see it. So if you like the stream, and I'd appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up, and then also any subscriptions would be great. So I'm always looking to grow my audience. So if you want to help me grow this channel, then I'd appreciate if you consider subscribing if you're not already subscribed. Thanks to those of you who are. All right, see, we got another person in the chat. Let me take a look at that. Okay. So, yeah, this is from Diego, Deeper with Diego. Um, and I saw you submitted a question you put a comment on my last video, Diego. Um, and I'm not sure right now that I want to engage on this because if you're the person who I think you are, you put out a video analyzing or doing like a reaction video to one of my calls to Sam Cedar a few years ago, I think. And my memory of that call is not great, but based on some things that uh, were said in that, I'm not sure right now, at least, that I want to engage. So um, maybe this is something that's better to just talk about. I don't know if we could do it through email or something. I would actually be interested to see that video again because, as I mentioned, my memory of it is not great. But I think maybe some things were said in it that make me, I guess, hesitate somewhat to engage. So I would want to review that at least. Um, so yeah, I'm just not sure I want to engage right now, and maybe I'll leave it at that. I mean, with certain individuals, this is the case. I mean, I do want to engage, but um, if I see something that's been said by a certain individual to me, which maybe I don't think maybe I think it's disrespectful or something, then I think I might want to just not engage with that person, or at least have a chat with them in some other forum, maybe privately through email or something before I engage publicly with the person. So um, yeah, I see there's another comment. Uh, okay, well, thanks for coming by. Yeah, I mean, maybe we can engage another time, but I think at least for now, um, let's not do it. And I guess if you're interested, you can email me and maybe we can discuss this some more. I have an email for my channel. It's theselfishnessproject@gmail.com. So if you want to talk to me through that channel, we can do that. And maybe then we'll figure out from there. But anyways, thanks for coming by today, at least. All right, so let's see. Is there any? Oh, okay. There's another one from Grant that came in. Um, so let me see what Grant says. He says, "Yeah, just seems to me any ability to prove reason worthwhile is using circular logic, especially from a secular perspective." Okay, so I think I see. Maybe we're trying to get at something else with your prior comments. How do you prove reason is valuable? Um, yeah, so you can't. prove reason without presupposing the efficacy or the validity of reason. So your faculty of proving anything is reason. So if you're going to use reason to prove reason, you are being circular. So I guess um, the only sense in which you could prove reason, well, maybe I should use the term validate instead. This issue comes up in OPAR, that is Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand by Leonard Peikoff. Um, there's a there's a discussion in the first show, sorry, not the first chapter. Um, I'm really on like podcast mode, calling it a show. In the first chapter of his book, there's a discussion of axioms, and he says at one point that you can't prove the axioms, um, but you can validate them. Which I guess maybe part of that is showing why you can't prove them by showing that you have to rely on them in any attempt to deny them. They're called, this is called reaffirmation through denial. It's a technique of showing how if you try to deny something like A is A, the law of identity, you end up having to assume the truth of A is A in order to deny it. And this is a way of showing that you just can't get around the axioms. They're implicit in everything. Um, so if something does have that sort of status where it's just implicit in everything, every item of knowledge, then there's no way to get underneath it, so to speak. So you can't really prove it, but you can validate it, meaning show that it has this fundamental axiomatic sort of status. So you can do that. Um, and I guess reason is, I guess you have to take its, maybe it's right to say that reason should be regarded as axiomatically correct. Um, or maybe consciousness as axiomatically valid. Like you can't prove that consciousness is conscious of something, that it actually gives you knowledge of the world. How would you prove that? By means of non-consciousness? You can't get outside of consciousness. Um, so I think reason is sort of it's an aspect of consciousness. It's the distinctively human aspect of consciousness. So there's also perception, which the animals have, their senses, right? Sight, hearing, so forth, taste, touch, smell. Um, but and you can't. Those are also, I think, axiomatically um, valid. Like you can't coherently deny the validity of the senses. What would your objection be based on to the senses? Well, any reasoning you do ultimately is based on sensory observations, unless you're like a rationalist who believes in innate ideas, who thinks your conceptual content cannot doesn't isn't based on sense perception. But if you have a more empiricist sort of view, and that term is used in different ways, but just taking empiricism to mean the idea that all knowledge is based on sensory evidence, well, you can't then have a objection to sense experience. Like you can't run some rational arguments against sense experience, which is going to work because all rationality, all reasoning depends on sense experience. So you'd be cutting off the limb that you are sitting on, so to speak. Um, so there's no coherent argument against the senses. All you can do is you can validate them maybe, but you can't prove the efficacy of the senses. Let's see what there was something else in. Or let me see if there's anything else in Grant's comment. He says, uh, "Just seems to me any ability to prove reason worthwhile is using circular logic." Okay, covered that, and then especially from a secular perspective. Yeah. Okay. So I think I addressed that comment sufficiently for now, at least. But if you want to add anything else, feel free. Let's see what else has come in here. Leighton Prion is here. Um, Welcome back. All right, so those are the only other comments right here that I have to address. So I do have an open line. So if anyone wants to come in, I put a link in the chat. I haven't pinned it though. Let me do that. Just make sure it doesn't get lost. I'll pin the very first message. Um, so if you want to call into Zoom, then all you need to do is click on that link that's pinned in the chat. Or there's also a phone number, which I put in the second message. I guess I can't pin that too. I can only pin one message, but there is a phone number there if anyone wants to call in, 669-444-9171, and then you'll be prompted to enter a meeting ID, which for anyone who's only listening, not watching, let me tell you the meeting ID, 822-545-60119. Again, that's 822-545-60119, then followed by the pound sign. And then I think you'll be prompted to enter the pound sign a second time. And so just hit it a second time. And then once you do that, you'll be in the waiting room. It looks like this number, the main phone number there is going to always be the same. But then there's a specific meeting ID for Zoom, which every show I do, that the meeting ID will change. So I have to update that each show. Um, but anyway, that's how to call in. Oh, Hree is back. Hi, Hree. He says, like the stream if you enjoy it, guys. Appreciate that. Yeah, I see we got some more likes here, so thanks for doing that. And thanks, Free, for promoting the liking of the stream and the chat. I guess you could also dislike it. I don't know if that helps engagement or not. I mean, it is more engagement, but engagement in a negative way. So maybe it's doesn't help promote the stream as much. But anyways, I can at least say that I like it when people like the stream. But honesty is good. So um, do whatever is true to how you feel. Okay, so let's see what else is going on. I've been continuing to read about January 6th. I saw concurrent viewers are at 7, it says on my screen. So maybe that's why I slipped into saying, and there's 7 likes also. So I'm seeing all these sevenths. Maybe that's why I said January 7th. No, I've been reading about January 6th, the attack on the Capitol some more. So as I've mentioned in my recent streams, I've been reading about that. Partly because I generally have an interest in history and more recently current events. Partly so I can engage more with people on this live stream about topics that are going on in the culture. So that's an event which I didn't really follow closely at the time it happens, but I wanted to learn more about it now. And one of the immediate prompts for that was on Harry Binswanger's forum. So this is objectivist philosopher Harry Binswanger, who has uh, a web forum, hbletter.com, which I've been on for many years. And there were some posts recently about, at least partly about January 6th. And that's motivated me to look into the issue some more. So I've been posting on Harry's forum about this. And I guess more specifically, I was looking into who initiated the violence. So this is the important principle within the objectivist political philosophy, the initiation of force, right? That's bad according to objectivism. And it's okay to use force in self-defense, but you shouldn't start the use of force. You should not initiate the use of force. And there was a post on HBL, I'll call it, Harry's Forum, which seemed to be saying that the police, rather than the protesters, were the initiators of force. So it said the Trump put out some tweets while the Capitol was being attacked, and he did that um, after so I guess after the protesters were fired on by the police, fired on with flash grenades and rubber bullets. And it was after the protesters were fired upon that they charged the Capitol. And he even underlined the word after in his post. It's like really seemed to be highlighting the temporal relation of these events. So it seemed like he was suggesting that the protesters weren't the initiators of the violence. Rather, it was the police. And it was only after the police fired on the protesters that they charged the Capitol. And I looked into this and it did not bear scrutiny, at least my scrutiny. So on my reading of what happened, the actual initiation of violence happens well before these events of rubber bullets or flash grenades. Um, so the first instance of violence I was able to find occurred at 12:53 p.m. This was actually during Trump's speech at the Ellipse, where I think he was inciting the riots and encouraging it, while also out of the other side of his mouth, he had at least one line where he says, "March peacefully and patriotically down to the Capitol," or something like that. I don't remember the exact words, but he did have that one instance of using the word peacefully. But I saw somewhere there was like 20 instances of the word fight. So maybe he was just putting in that one instance of peaceful in order to get plausible deniability, like so that later he could say, "Oh, I actually wasn't trying to encourage a riot." So, but if you look at all his actions in um, his actions during the attack and after, for instance, like his pardoning of the January 6th attackers, I think it's pretty clear where his sympathies lie, which is with the attackers. Um, but anyways, it was during his speech on the Ellipse, which is this park I guess, just a minute or so, a few minutes from the White House, that the actual violence started down near the Capitol, um, uh, a few thousand feet, or I don't know if it's a mile. I don't know how long exactly to the east. There's a place called the Peace Circle near the Capitol grounds before you actually get up to the building itself. There's a circle within the road structure called Peace Circle, and that's where the first standoff was between the police and the protesters. So there were these bicycle racks that were being used as barricades, and the police were behind those barricades on the side of the Capitol, and then the protesters who had marched, they marched to that spot from the west, from the Washington Monument, which is close to the Ellipse, and then the protesters eventually knocked down those barricades and injured police officers who were behind them, and that was the start of the violence. And I think it was only about an hour later at least that's what I was able to find. The first instance I could find of rubber bullets being used was close to about an hour later after this event. And then the flash grenades was a few hours after that. I think around 5 p.m. Was the first, maybe only instance I could find of those. But in any case, I think it's clear that the the initiators of the violence on this day were the protesters, not the police. So I read about that, and I also read some other articles relating. So part of this I learned from reading the January 6th report, which is the report produced by the January 6th committee in the House of Representatives. It's I guess 8 chapters long, and I read chapter 8 recently. It just took several hours to read, but then I also read some other articles on Wikipedia about January 6th. So that's some about what I've been learning about recently. Okay, so um, anything anyone else want to put in the chat? Anyone want to just say hello? Put any other comments, questions, objections, anything in the chat? Or anyone want to call in? There is a phone line open or a Zoom line. All you need to do is click that link that I have pinned in the chat. And as I said, as we've done in previous calls, I can carry the conversation if you want to come on. So don't feel like you need to have a specific point you really want to make. We can just do a interview, and I can interview you. I can get to know some of my listeners. And I did this in a previous live stream with Hari from Bulgaria, and we just did a little get to know you chat. And I'm happy to do that if anyone else wants to come on. Um, so if there's not anything else, then I can always do what I've done in the past, which is just pause the stream, so I can just turn off my mic and camera for a bit, and then if anyone shows up in the chat and wants to engage or wants to call in, I can come back and we can engage. But I don't have a lot of prepared material to talk about. It's mostly driven by engagement from you all. So that's what I'm looking for here. Hari asked, "Did my last comment appear?" The only comment I've seen is the one from 1:27 p.m. Pacific time that says, "Like the stream if you enjoy it, guys." That's the only. So I've only seen that comment, and then your one just the one you just put in now asking, "Did my last comment appear?" That's all I've seen from you, Free. So hopefully you didn't try to do another comment which disappeared into the cyber ether. Um, Let me see if there's anything else that I can just do a ad lib on while we're okay here. Well, maybe there's some other things I can talk about. Um, but I want to give priority to people who have come here to participate live in the chat or call in. So if you all have topics that you want to raise or ask about, I want to give those priority. But I guess until I see that, I got some other stuff here I could talk a bit about. Let me just close some windows here so I don't get confused. Yeah, I'm going to close this one. And let's see. Oh, I've got to open this in a new window. I'm going to close this. Yeah, let me do that. I got to make sure my charger doesn't stop charging because I'm low on battery and my charger cord is not well positioned, so it doesn't attach very firmly to the to my laptop. So I'm worried it's gonna fall out here. Let me adjust this here. We don't want the stream crashing in the middle because my laptop dies. Okay, I think that's gonna work better. All right, let me close this. Oh no, that's not okay. Oh, it looks like we got some more chats here. Okay, let me catch up now. We got a bunch coming in. Darwin. Hi, Darwin. You're back. Been a little while. And you say you're in the queue. Oh, you called in? Let me. Okay, I see your. Oh, it looks like you might have used the phone number to dial in. Okay, hold on just a minute. Let me just catch up on the chat, and then I'll come to you. Um, yeah, so Darwin has been in some of my previous chats. We talked a lot about Israel and the war in Gaza, and I guess we also talked about some other things, but that's the main topic I remember. So I don't know if that's what Darwin wants to talk about or something else. I did do a reply to one of your comments. I don't know if you saw that video, but I think the last live stream you were here, Darwin, um, you left a comment on that video, and then in the next live stream, I replied to your comments. This was it was I'm going to pull it up now. The one about 2.3 million people want to kill all the Jews. Um, that comment you were attributing to me that was my view, and then I was addressing that, saying that actually I didn't say that. Some people want to kill the Jews, but I didn't say every single person in Gaza, all 2.3 million or however many of them are. So that was, I think that was the stream from, it says 13 days ago. I think that was the one. IQ Israel. Um, that's how the title starts. I'm just opening that up now to confirm. Look in the description. It was either that one or the next one. Anyways, I don't want to keep people waiting too long, so let me just come back to the chat. All right, Hree says, I hope now appears. Um, let me make some. Uh, oh, now I see another one. Um, oh, yeah, I had to switch from top chat to live chat. I didn't realize that would make a difference. But when I made that switch, then I did see another comment from Free. Uh, yeah, I thought like if there weren't a ton of chats, like so many that you can't keep up with them, then they would all appear even if you have it on top chat mode. But I guess it filters them out even if they're not like, thousands of comments coming in. So that's good to know. So I guess I'll always try to put it on live chat mode, so I don't miss anything. So it looks like the one of yours that I missed, three, was maybe the one that says, I wonder which side is more likely to initiate physical violence on average, the liberals or conservatives. Um, okay. And if I didn't have someone in the waiting room right now, I might talk about that. But um, I wanted to quickly go through these chats so I could get to the call from Darwin. So let me continue quickly trying to go through these chats, and maybe I'll come back to that. Any other comments that I don't have time to address right now. Um, thanks for mentioning that, Diego. That helped. The live chat versus the top chat. Mark Thomas is back. Hi, Mark. Into the ether, never to return. No, I think maybe it was just into the live chat. Maybe that's where it went. Darwin says he called in via phone. Okay. Yeah, phone number appears, so I guess that's the sign. Otherwise, I think just your name will show up when you're in the waiting room. Um, how many more? Mark Thomas says something about interest on the new star-based town in Texas, or how privatization or new communities are necessary for scientific projects or individual rights stand. Okay, maybe I'll get to that later. I'll probably go for at least 2 hours today. Usually I go for like roughly 2 hours, and I started it about 45 minutes ago. So we'll see how long this call with Darwin goes, and I'll probably have some time after that, and maybe I can then address some other of these chat messages. Um, oh, Darwin says, yes, I misinterpreted. I mean, I guess he's referring to my point, when I said some people want to kill all the Jews. Um, I guess that's what he's referring to. Okay, then Mark says, would like to join. Oh, okay. So Mark says he wants to join Zoom after Darwin. Okay. I think you can join the waiting room now if you want. Um, and I'll just click on Darwin first, and I don't know how long that will be, but I think I can have more than one person in the waiting room, but you can call in later too if you want to. All right, so I'm going to take this call from Darwin. Just a moment. All right, Darwin, you're on.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can.
All right, perfect. Well, thanks for taking my call.
You're
So
welcome.
I wanted to talk briefly about boycotts. So, do you think that boycotts are a form of protected political expression? Because many Supreme Court rulings have stated that they're protected under the First Amendment.
Boycotts. This is a topic I haven't thought much about, so I might just be giving you off the top of my head answers. But so you're asking me if I think
Do you agree with the Supreme Court's decisions that boycotts are protected forms of political expression?
I didn't even know they made a decision about boycotts.
So
Is this
they've made
something recent?
several decisions about boycotts over the
Okay.
past 100 years or so.
Okay. So, as I've mentioned in previous streams, I do study history, and but history is a vast field, and I've been reading about medieval England most recently, and then also some about much more current events like January 6th. But boycotts of the Supreme Court's rulings about boycotts in the last 100 years is not something that I have read at all about. So I don't have any opinion about any of those rulings because I know nothing about them.
Okay, so I'll get a little more specific. So recently, the NIH ruled that grant recipients, those who receive money from the federal government, cannot engage in BDS, which is boycott, divestment, or sanctions against Israel. So if you stipulate, because this is correct, that boycott is a political form of expression protected under the First Amendment, why or how is it possible that grant recipients are not allowed to engage in BDS? Do you think that's justified?
Okay, we got to slow down here some more because there's a lot for me to process. So let me just make sure I got the basic facts right. So you said that so BDS, boycott, divest, sanction, is that what does that stand for?
Yeah, so that's just the general movement of, not purchasing things from companies that operate in, you won't agree with this, but in what's called occupied territories. So just not buying
Yeah,
products from them.
I've heard that there is a BDS movement with regard to Israel, or at least parts of. Well, yeah, I'll just leave it there with regard to Israel, and are, and the Supreme Court has made a ruling or maybe multiple rulings
So
regarding this.
not with respect to BDS specifically, but with so they've made several rulings on how boycott is a protected form of political expression.
Okay. Well, just, I mean, one
So
thought,
like
my first thought is that it should be boycotting something is should be something up to individuals. Like you're not using force. Like it's up to me whether I patronize a certain restaurant. Like so if some restaurant, say in the 1950s, is being racist, I can boycott that restaurant and by choosing not to go there, and I can go somewhere else for my food, and that should be up to me. So, off the top of my head, I think people should be able to boycott anything they want. They're not initiating force against anyone, and that's the key principle for me in terms of like political philosophy. As long as your actions don't involve initiating force against someone, which boycotts do not, as far as I can tell, then they should be allowed.
hmm All right, perfect. So, are you in agreement that so-called anti-BDS laws, which are in around 38 U.S. states, are unconstitutional?
It seems right to me that that would be, well, I don't know what's in the Constitution exactly. Like, I'm not a constitutional scholar, maybe, but what I can say is I think the
So, you would agree
Constitution
that it
should
violates
allow,
expression, political expression?
yeah, it seems right to me that people should be able to boycott anything they want, and that should
Okay,
be
great.
legal.
So, I
Um,
mean, isn't it? It's kind of terrible that if you're a government contractor, your freedom of speech is going to be curbed because you have to conform to promising that you will not engage in BDS. So that's all I'm saying. And then the second topic I wanted to talk about is so I don't want to go on for too long. I want to give others the opportunity to speak. But you said that Israel isn't engaging in apartheid. Um,
or at
so
least I'm very
why
suspicious
why
of
do
it.
you think that is?
Well, I guess I'm thinking now. South Africa, I think, is like the best example, but I don't know much about that. Um, so I'm probably not I'm sure certainly not the best person to debate this issue, but going on the what I have learned, limited as it is about this issue, um, there are certain laws in place in Israel like that permit um, Arabs to serve in the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, which, if that's the case, then I think that would be one example of evidence as to
Mhm.
Israel not being
Yeah, but that's
an
that's
apartheid
that's
sort of
Israel
state.
proper, and in Israel proper, there are over 60 laws that apply unequally to Arab and Jewish citizens. I mean, one example is the Israeli nation state law. There's also um, laws that prevent certain Arab people from buying property in certain locations, which is housing discrimination. So that's just Israel proper. But looking at the West Bank, it's been under military occupation since 1967. Jewish settlers are brought under a different legal court system than Palestinians in the West Bank. Palestinian West Banks are subject to um, court martialing and military courts that have over a 99.9% conviction rate, which is statistically impossible given the distribution of innocent people. Just statistically, it's improper. And Gaza has been under a 17-year-long blockade where they don't have access to their potable water sources. They don't have access to the Gaza Marine. They don't have access to offshore fisheries. They have no freedom of movement or control over their economy. So, I mean, it's hard to argue that it's not an apartheid.
Okay, so just a caveat at the beginning here. So I'm not an expert on this issue, and I have been reading more about it recently, but my ability to debate this issue is definitely limited. But I can just make some points that come to mind that at least might be relevant to consider. So I do think things maybe should be different in the West Bank and Gaza as opposed to the rest of Israel because these areas are sources of attacks sources of
Yeah, but if you
terrorism.
make that argument, if you
Hold
make
on.
that argument,
Let
then
me hold on.
but the thing is, like, you just can't say
Wait,
that they're
wait,
sources of attacks when
you talk for a couple minutes,
Israel,
so you gotta
yeah,
wait. You gotta wait.
okay,
I'll give you a chance
fair enough.
to come back. Just let me say one or two things. Um, so if some country attacks you, let's say if Israel is being attacked by rockets or terrorists whose origin is the West Bank or Gaza or the Golan Heights up in Syria, then I think Israel, in the name of self-defense from those attacks, can go into those places and root out the threats. And there might need to be some kind of different rules that apply in those places specifically, given the way their populations are acting, or at least a large majority of their populations. And I think there have been polls showing that like many of the non-combatants in Gaza support attacks on Israel and support Hamas. So I don't think it's the case like that you have this majority of the population who is opposing the people in power. Rather, I think there's a significant degree of alignments. And when you have a population like that, then I think it's reasonable to consider, maybe you have to have different sorts of rules given the nature of the population. Now, if I knew more details, I could say more, but let me just pause at this point and then I'll throw it back to you.
Sure. So I would argue that the 17-year blockade is so it can't be justified by a security concern because it is a literal implementation of collective punishment, which is a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. And also, like, all right, so we'll concede there have been thousands of rockets attacks from Hamas in the Gaza Strip, but it's not a reaction to nothing. They've been under 17 years of brutal occupation, and I'm not saying that it's justified. But if those strikes were on military targets alone, then it would be justified because they have the right to protect themselves.
Okay, so I'm just taking some notes here. That's why I'm looking down over here. So one point you brought up was collective punishments, and you mentioned the Geneva Conventions, and then you mentioned a allegedly brutal occupation for 17
It's not.
years.
It's not alleged. It's not alleged.
So this is going back to 17 years. That was 2008. Okay.
It might be more. So after the election of Hamas, the United States attempted a coup by funneling weapons through the Egyptian border to Fatah. Then there was a civil war. Hamas regained control, and then Israel imposed a blockade,
Okay. Let me
which has been ongoing since then.
okay, so let's see, where do I want to start with this? Okay, yeah, let me start with this. So, brutal occupation. Now, um, my understanding is I don't know how long this has been going on, but Israel supplies certain goods like electricity, internet, maybe water, I don't know what else, to Gaza. But if some area is attacking you, like firing rockets, thousands of rockets at your country, yet you are providing them with these services, that seems maybe absurd or incoherent. There's some kind of tension there. Like, why would you
Can I
be
may I
helping
respond to
out
that?
your? Yeah, go ahead.
So they don't. So I mean, they nominally provide them power, but Gaza had its own power plant established in 2002 that Israel recurrently bombed. And as for potable water, Gaza should be able to establish its own desalination plants and have control over potable water sources, but Israel is in control of those. And also, why? So you say Israel provides all of these goods and services. Why are potato chips not allowed in? Why is chocolate not allowed in? I mean, this is it's an attempt to immiserate the population to make them get rid of Hamas,
Okay.
which is collective punishment. I mean, and Hamas, of course, is a religious fundamentalist, disgusting organization. I would rather that they had secularists there. But what type of extremism is going to come out of, the being occupied? I mean, it's inevitable. This is what happens in Northern Ireland with the ANC in South Africa. These violent movements arise in the face of just intractable injustice. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's predictable.
Okay, I'm thinking maybe it would be good to try to get into some fundamental issues of political philosophy here, where I'm a bit more at home. Like, so if we talk about what is the way, what is the, so egoism versus altruism, that's an ethical issue. So I'm not sure where you stand on that, but I think if you have an egoistic foreign policy, if your goal as a country is to defend yourself, which I think is an egoistic or self-interested kind of policy, then it's going to look very different than if you have an altruistic or self-sacrificing sort of foreign policy. Now, I think, following my fundamental ethical convictions, that egoism in foreign policy is good. A nation should defend itself from attack, and it should not sacrifice itself to other nations. So maybe to try to identify our if there is a fundamental point of common ground between us that we could use as a basis for further discussion, we could talk about this point for a bit. I'm curious what you think about this issue of egoism versus altruism. Like, because if you're opposed to egoism just in general, then that's going to put us on fundamentally different frameworks for analyzing this conflict in politics, or just in ethics. It doesn't even have to be politics. But if we don't even agree about whether egoism is good, then we're certainly not going to agree about anything about this war. Um, or at least many things we're not going
Yeah,
to agree
so
on. So
I think I'm less interested in going into the political abstractions of it, and more interested with reducing harm and giving, one person one vote. So I don't think we're going to agree on that, but I was happy to chat with you, and I'll give opportunity for other speakers to come in. Thanks, Dan.
sure,
Okay, bye bye.
bye. All right. So there goes Darwin. Yeah, so I thought it would be good to discuss these basic issues because, I mean, as I said, if we're not on the same page about those basics, we're not going to make progress on something less basic, something more derivative. Um, like if maybe that's clear enough, but I was just thinking, like, if you speak a different language, like, right, let's say he knows Spanish and I only know English, until we're speaking the same sort of language, we're not going to be able to talk about anything in particular. So unless we have the same fundamental framework, um, there's no progress going to be made. Now, he said at the end, like, he's less interested in talking about political abstractions than about like what's good for individual people or one person, one vote. But there's really no escaping ethics, because when you use that term good, that's an ethical term. So what you take to be good in politics is going to depend on what you take to be good in ethics. It doesn't Politics does not float free from ethics. It flows out of ethics. So if you have an altruistic conception of the good, as I think maybe most people in the world do today, they think it's good to be self-sacrificing, at least to some degree, then I think you're going to have an altruistic foreign policy. You're not going to stand up for yourself. Maybe you're going to think Israel is too proud if it, unleashes force against another country. And I think Israel has been too timid, actually. I mean, it's been dealing with this terrorist threat for decades. And the United States also has been dealing with terrorist threats. There was 9/11, of course, which I didn't think had to happen. I think if we had a stronger, more self-interested, a bolder, kind of a more self-interested, egoistic foreign policy, we could have avoided that, and Israel could have avoided that. Um, but because I don't think Israel and the United States have a consistently self-interested foreign policy because I think they make too many concessions to anti-self-interested foreign policies. Um, I think they've been too weak in defending themselves, and they've allowed terrorism to fester. And this cycle of violence just it continues, and it's not going to stop until they they get a new moral framework, which I think is what Ayn Rand provides, which no one else does. A rational framework of rational egoism. And but if you don't agree with rational egoism, then I don't think there is a good solution to the conflict in the Middle East. I think it really is. It comes down to an ethical, moral issue. So I think that really is where the action is. Um, and then, if you can agree on that, then we can have debates on like tactics and strategy. What is exactly the best way for a country to pursue its self-interest? But if you don't agree solidly on self-interest, then that's a very different discussion. Then we have to talk about that. Um, but anyways, thanks, Darwin, for coming in. I do appreciate the call. And I see Matt has entered the waiting room. All right, I'm going to get to you in a minute, Matt. Let me just take a quick look at the chat before I get to your call. Uh, John Wayne, hi. Um, Welcome back to the stream. Um, John Wayne says pretty much anything he says is invalidated by October 7th. Good, to be honest. He has a very reactionary approach. It's all the system's fault, nothing to do with a person's own ideology. And Ree says, no matter what Israel does, it would be wrong. In quotes, wrong. That's what happens when you make a country slash land that haven't existed for 14 centuries. Then John says, quote, reducing harm, unquote, as some innate thing. And then no context required. And then Mark says, in the Zoom room as Matt T. Yeah, so Mark has a different screen name on Zoom. All right, Mark, I'm going to let you in right now, or Matt. All right, Matt, you are in. You are on. You just need to unmute.
Yeah, I think this works. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Hey,
Yeah, howdy, Dan. Glad to be on the show.
yeah, welcome
Um,
back.
yeah, so what was it? Yeah, for me, I fortunately kind of was seeing this at work.
By the way,
So for me, it's
do you
kind
want to
of
go by? Do you want me to call you Matt or Mark, or do you
no,
care?
Mark T is the thing for me. It's another student, so yeah, Mark works best.
Okay, so I'll call you Mark. That's the one. Okay. All right. So, you said you're at work.
Yeah, as of right now, so kind of tuning in, but had wanted to just kind of pop in and yeah, I do apologize again. I'm super fatigued for some
Oh, no
reason,
problem.
but to
It's interesting
um
that you're able to hear me at work. I guess I guess some people they work jobs where they can listen to a podcast or something like, I don't know, maybe if you're you drive for Uber or something and you can turn on a podcast maybe. But anyways,
safely, as long as you're doing that
yeah,
safely.
yeah,
But yeah, I wanted to ask your thoughts about some recent news regarding apparently over in Texas, there's going to be a new city brand being hopefully crossing fingers over by the SpaceX launch center by the name of Starbase Texas. And so I wanted to, I think in the chat I mentioned a little earlier, but I want to hear your thoughts on whether or not something like that could be looked at, especially from objective perspective, as something positive. That is to say, it's kind of people separating themselves and the sciences from kind of onerous regulation by states, and what kind of advantages that might um, be. What kind of advantages might be gained for individual rights, for science, what have you, compared to kind of the existing kind of paradigm, existing cultural and political paradigm where the state is seen as the kind of the the monopoly hegemon and the one that's supposed to be doing everything for everyone in a collectivist way, even though that's often not the case, or well, even that though that is the case, it's not always it's not it isn't always good, or it's arguably very bad.
Okay. I'm
Sorry,
not sure
that's
I got all the question, but I did have at least uh, one thought that I wanted to make. So I do think that it's good that there's been more privatization in space exploration. So instead of just having a government do space exploration, like NASA doing its trips to the put a man on the moon and so forth. I don't think that's actually a proper function of government, like just exploring space. So I do see it as a good thing that private companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos's company, are doing more of this. There's a podcast about this, about privatizing of space exploration on the Ayn Rand Institute's podcasts. I think some months ago, Mike Mazza was in that. So if you're interested in this topic, I would recommend checking that out. He certainly knows a lot more about this than I do, but I do think that it is good that it's private companies that are doing space exploration rather than the government. Because I think the proper role of the government is just to defend people's rights from the initiation of physical force. And it's not really clear that that purpose is furthered by doing space exploration. Now, I guess you might make a argument like, well, by doing space exploration, we can have better um, defense from attack. Like if we can create space vehicles which can go fly over enemy countries and attack them, or shoot down rockets that are fired at us. Maybe, there's kind of an indirect argument you can make for why space exploration um, aids the fundamental purpose of government, which is self-defense. But I think at least much of what uh, I just want to hear an argument for that effect. Like it shouldn't be taken for granted that uh, anything the government does in space has some kind of self-defense um, payout in the end. Um, that has to be made clear. Maybe it shouldn't be doing any, or maybe there's a limited amount it should be doing. I'm not sure. I haven't really thought through that yet, but it's not clear to me that it should be doing as much as it has been doing now. And I don't know if the government even tries. I don't know if it even has made an attempt to argue that what it's done up to this point, like putting a man on the moon, is ultimately for the purpose of self-defense, or if it just justifies it in some completely unrelated way. But if it is
they
legitimate,
probably have.
um,
Sorry to interrupt, but I would say they probably have, like indirectly, it's kind of um, the axiomize off of like the so-called argument of the greater good, and then they're saying, oh well, based on these applications, we now have platforms we can use for geospatial intelligence, or for da da da. And so I do say that they probably arguments could be made easily. It's whether or not that really it's justified on like objectivist grounds or on like logical grounds, as to whether they should keep taking money from us to do so, when other entities might do so at more efficiently. And I think, like, as far as like those arguing that none of this should be done, that you do indeed have those as well among like kind of some extreme pacifist tendencies and the libertarian movement, um, as well as some extreme pacifist other ideologies that are have their own problems. But yeah, I would just do continue.
Well, I guess whatever, uh, uh, like whether or not the government does anything in space, whether it has any space program at all, it should be voluntarily funded. Um, and I mean that's true of anything the government does. It shouldn't use coercion, that is like by taxes, to fund anything. So um, if it does have a space program, it needs to be funded by voluntary means, and it's not, at least not presently. So that is a problem. Now I don't know if I would be interested to hear though whether the government has actually argued that the space program is for self-defense ultimately, and that's what justifies it. I'm kind of doubtful um, that they have argued that, but that's just kind of a hunch. That I think it's unlikely, just given my general sense of. I mean, they don't try to justify a lot of things by self-defense, like the welfare state, like Social Security or Medicare. These are not programs which I think they justify by means of saying, well, it helps us defend people from the initiation of force. Rather, they think there's like a moral right people have to these these programs to a certain standard of living, for instance. So I'd be surprised if
Or
they
weird
did it for the space
deontological
program.
arguments, like or weird deontological arguments. So if you do not feed these people, they will get harmed, and therefore because that's kind of one of the mainstream arguments. Oh, for like welfare state, though, if you don't feed these people, ensure them a standard of living, something bad, meaning them coming to harm will come about. There may also be externalities like, oh well, there's people that are poor, destitute will be more likely to turn to crime and harm others, and by preventing that through welfare states, and you're preventing that, and that in our modern day we're seeing that go into kind of like woke and like absurdist dimensions, like basically advocating for like so-called basically letting criminals off, so as opposed to them being segregated from society in order to, as a retributive punishment, so to speak, for the very real harm they do to people. There's the trend among the center left liberals and others farther left from them to kind of just let criminals off the hook. In California, I believe they had until recently their like the statutory limit of for misdemeanor felony theft. Anything below like $900 would just be looked at the other way, or treated as misdemeanor, basically not prosecuted. And it took organized criminals um, taking advantage of that and resorting to violence to actually prompt citizens, not the government, the lawmakers, but citizens to propose a ballot to try and remedy that. And so they decide to like classify these theft crimes as felonies again. And now that there's some punishment towards them, but obviously it's just a demonstration how these arguments can for welfare states and for collectivism can and often do lead to bad social ends and outcomes that worse than the ones that they are allegedly trying to prevent. Um, and that's kind of what we need, proper frameworks for rights, such as those of objectives.
I do think that the egoism framework is really what's needed for rights, which
Indeed.
objectivism uniquely offers. Because if you don't, I mean, if you think it's right to live for the sake of others, so if you have an altruist um, moral code, then is there what's stopping you from forcing some people to support others by redistributing their wealth? I mean, aren't you just forcing people to do what's good, forcing people to do what's right, which is help out others. Um, I guess what some conservatives will say is, well, it is right to help others, but you shouldn't be forced to do it. So they just object to the forced argument, the forced aspect of it. Not that they don't object to the idea that you should be helping out others like as a moral obligation. Um, they just say you shouldn't be forced. But I mean, if you're really opposed to self-interest, can you make an argument that you shouldn't force people? I mean, is isn't it selfless or self-sacrificial to give up your right to decide who your money should support or who your life or time should support? Isn't it selfish for you to say, no, I get to decide. I should be left free to voluntarily choose who my money goes to support, who I'm going to help. Isn't that selfish? Wouldn't it be more selfless to give up that right of deciding what happens with your wealth? I think it would be more selfless. So I don't think the conservatives really have a coherent argument in the end for opposing uh, being forced to redistribute their wealth through taxation to supporting others because it's selfless to give up that right to decide how your own money is chosen. And there, if you're in favor of being selfless or self-sacrificing, then what's you really have no argument against being forced. At least I think that's a reasonable way to look at it. So
Perhaps, like I know that may be a little bit towards like reductio ad absurdum, because obviously in conservative theology, to my understanding, they're actually they go about that differently. Like um and for me, I'm having kind of a brain fart at the same, for which I apologize. I'm kind of drawing a blank, but essentially, they're seeing there's like kind of a difference. Um, it's not pure selflessness. Let's start from that. There's a specific kind of um, teleological and ontological kind of guidestones that they prefer with regards to what kinds of social ends should be pursued and upheld and what should not be. Um, in some schools, like particularly those inspired by Augustinianism, I think there's something uh, like Augustine. No, not Augustine. Basically, there's also something a concept known as subsidiarity, which it's more among it's kind of more among like kind of Christian conservative circles um, um, as opposed to, or again, like 20th century, that essentially states that um, is against like government overreach by way of declaring that certain kinds of authority should be delegated to certain levels, and that those above should not dictate more than is like just to their that is just for them to do. Let's say an example as far as let's say the United States, which there's the kind of the federalism versus um, uh, state and local governments clashing. According to many mainstream U.S. constitutionalists, they believe that um, the federal government's job should be within those functions dictated explicitly or implicitly to it by the U.S. Constitution, and that anything outside of that purview should be left to the states and to the citizens, as well as to kind of lower levels of government. And that kind of jives with subsidiarity, but although thankfully in the case of like the U.S. federalism, there's hundreds of years of writing and like legal exegesis that thankfully supports that. It's not out of the blue, like, oh well, we prefer that the government doesn't, the federal government doesn't. I mean, thankfully, there's actual like writings, exegesis, and case law that supports that claim, as opposed to like kind of modern, so-called like constitutional modernist or have more liberal interpretations that um, are for more powers um, being levied by the federal government over everyone.
I haven't heard that term subsidiary before, or subsidiarity. I might want to look that up.
Yeah,
I'm
dude,
just
it's
looking.
fun. It's a fun rabbit hole. You'll get some Chesterton stuff out of it, but maybe that might bore you.
Yeah, maybe I'll take a look at that later. I want to take a quick look at the chat here, see if there's anything else here I want to reply to. See, we got some more for John Wayne and Hree. I already read that one. Oh, Jason Adams, hi. Welcome to the chat. Uh, you say, keep on keeping on. Glad to see more YouTube shows on objectivism. And then Free says, wow, subs started showing up. Um, you mean subscribers started showing up? I don't know if these are subscribers. I hope they are. So by the way, if you haven't subscribed, I'd definitely appreciate you consider being a subscriber. And thanks for all the likes. I appreciate that. Jason Adams says the government should have some basic understanding of cultivating terra incognito, left most often to the explorers and their charters. Okay, I'm not sure what that means. Um, and then Reese says the only good reason for a government to have a space program is to race another country's government on space exploration. Yeah, there was the space race back in the 50s, I think, between the USSR and the United States. But I don't think that should be, I don't think that's a proper thing for the government to be doing. Like, I think it should be left up to private entities unless you can somehow show that space exploration is necessary to further the cause of self-defense, because that's really what the government should be doing. It should be solely focused on defending individuals from force, whether that's through a police domestically or a military dealing with foreign threats. But if you can't show that space exploration is somehow furthering that goal, then I don't think it's a proper function of government. It might be that certain aspects of the space program are relevant to that goal and others are not. And in that case, only the government should only be doing the ones that are relevant to defending people from force. Okay, and then Jason says, I could see partnerships. Maybe I watch too much sci-fi, but space troopers and colonizers on exploration to the moon and Mars, if they go under some charter to establish a U.S. territory and chart flight paths. Um, oh, Jason says, guess I'm subscribed. uh, and then
Good
Shri
on you, Jason.
says, Shri says, my comment about space program was a joke, by the way. Oh, okay. All right. All right. So that catches us up on the chat. See, we got 10 people here right now, it looks like, and 9 likes. Went up a little bit. So thanks for that. Good to see. We haven't talked about reason is good or faith is bad yet, which is what I put in the title. But as I mentioned, we can talk about anything. That was just to see if I could get some people who might be particularly interested in that to pop by. All right.
Well,
So, Marc, while you're up here, is there anything else you wanted to chat about?
um, yeah, a few things like mainly your thoughts on for me, I might take a stab at that question, like kind of reason, um, just in not only to affirm that reason is good and that faith is bad, but also that about something about like what could be done to like kind of educate like more people on um, like negative rights and on Ayn Rand's work and about what kinds of partnerships might be possible. That'll probably be for next stream because for me I'm probably super limited on time now. But yeah, I'll go
Okay.
take a stab at that. And one that I did that I do recall is what is this? One of this is yeah, I have one book that I brought from. Oh, I just got a ring. I think I may need to leave sooner than
Okay.
I thought. But uh one other maybe you could like with the chat about what they think on the question of like faith being bad and um religion well religion also being bad by extension but reason being better than both of those and how exactly what work it took for human beings to kind of realize that. Because at least to me, it seems that it took millions of years of existence and the Western Enlightenment to kind of finally get reason to finally get develop proper responsibility basis for rational thinking and to refute a lot of the Attila might make right ethical systems that
Hmm.
people had believed. And for us, I would say us as like sapiens, we are probably the only species that has like kind of this reasoning as far as ethics. And like before us, no one else did this. And no one else is doing it to this degree. Um, Faith and like kind of trusting well, not so much trusting others, but it seems to be very hardwired, more hardwired to some people than not. And the fact that it took kind of hundreds of years um, for like classical liberalism to develop, for example, shows that it shows that it takes a lot to it takes a lot to act in a according to kind of rational bases and if they're spelled out, some people just wish to go on faith or on tradition, and that in
It's
order
certainly not
to push,
obvious. I think, like you mentioned, classical liberalism, or you know, or just putting it in terms of like the capitalism, the right political system. I think it's certainly not obvious what it is, and it does take people a while to figure it out. And there's a lot of philosophical underpinnings that have to be in place for people to reach the idea that something like capitalism is a good system. But
yes,
I'm going to thanks for your call, Mark. I'll say something about the reason and faith here in the remaining segments of my show. I think I'll go for I don't know till three or so, at least till three. But thanks for coming on. I appreciate the call.
got it. See you around.
All right, see ya. Bye bye. All right. Glad we could have a couple callers today. So yeah, let me just say a bit about the reason and faith issue. I think one thing to that's important is just to be clear on what those terms mean. So faith, the way I understand that is believing something without evidence. Um, so you might have faith that there's a God, right? If you take it on faith, that means you're believing that there's a God without evidence that there's a God. Now, you might have a rational argument for God. You might think you can use reason to prove that there's a God, but that wouldn't be believing in a God on faith, as I understand the term. I found in a lot of discussions and debates with people um, who are religious, they try to use the term faith in a different sort of way, maybe because they have the sense that if you do believe something without evidence, that is bad. So they don't want to say they don't want to concede that definition of what faith is. They'll say, "Yeah, I have evidence." But I don't think that's the right understanding of faith. Like to have some kind of evidence. Uh, it's rather the absence of evidence, and yet you believe it anyways. Otherwise, there's no contrast with reason. And I think the only way to understand what faith is in contrast to reason or maybe logic. Um, but if you just say faith means going by evidence, well, then what is the difference between that and science or any other form of believing something or cognition? Faith is something distinctive. It's a specific way of using your mind or maybe failing to use your mind. Um, So, what do you contrast faith with if you're not contrasting it with believing something on the basis of evidence? So, reason is uh, our faculty of thinking that humans distinctively have, and it operates by the method of logic. Um, and going into what logic consists of, that could be a long discussion. Um, but logic is essential to reason, and the basis of reasoning is the senses, as I mentioned earlier in the stream. Um, on an empiricist view, at least as I take that word here in this context, that means all your reasoning is based on your sensory observations. It's not detached from them. We don't come into the world with innate ideas. Rather, like in the womb, we don't already have in our minds um, like the idea that 2 plus 2 is 4, or that E equals MC squared, or that honesty is good, or that human beings have DNA. All these are all things that have to be discovered through empirical observations. And so if we use our observing faculties, our five senses, as the basis of knowledge, and then use our reasoning to go beyond what our senses tell us. So the animals, they also have their sensory faculties, but they can't go beyond that to the conceptual level, which humans distinctively have. Um, uh, and humans need to learn how to use their conceptual faculty. It doesn't operate automatically. So Aristotle, he discovered the laws of logic, or at least some of the laws of logic, in ancient Greece, some 2,000 years ago. But human beings have been around for much longer than that, right? I don't know if you want to go back hundreds of thousands of years or millions of years to when humans first evolved, but humans had this faculty of reason for eons before they really understood how to use it well and use it to discover new knowledge. Um, but when the ancient Greek civilization came on the scene, finally, for the first time, human beings learned how to, at least some, about how to use their rational faculties in order to discover knowledge about the world. And then there was an explosion of knowledge in ancient Greece. And then following that, some centuries later, there was the Dark Ages. And when human beings turned away from reason and relied more on faith during the Middle Ages, where Christianity was dominant. And then there was a rediscovery, a Renaissance um, around the time of Thomas Aquinas. He initiated the period of the Renaissance, or he was a key figure in the Renaissance, which I guess I, I don't know exactly how you want to carve up the timeline, but some people say the Renaissance starts around 1500, But Thomas Aquinas, who brought Aristotle's philosophy back into the Western world, he was alive in the 13th century, the 1200s. So it took, a couple centuries or so for the Aristotelian ideas to really have a broader cultural impact. And that led to the Renaissance and the scientific revolution and another explosion of knowledge discovery. Um, so even though we have this faculty, this amazing faculty of reason, it's not obvious how to use it. Humans have to figure that out, and they've gone in. There's been ebbs and flows in how much they've used their reason over history, and I guess that whole story that could be. I mean, many we could talk about that for a long time, but just to get a broad, sweeping overview, there was a kind of rebirth in respect for reason in the centuries following Thomas Aquinas, but but simultaneously, I think many philosophers were undermining reason. Um, so you had Descartes, who was kind of skeptical in certain ways. He doubted everything, and he did it. He doubted the evidence of his senses, and he tried to find one firm point that he could, some indubitable truth that couldn't possibly be wrong. And this is his famous cogito. I think, therefore I am. He said that I couldn't possibly be wrong about that. So that's going to be the basis of my philosophy or my ideas. That's like my solid bedrock. Um, and then he proceeded to develop. Well, I guess he I think he thought he needed God somewhere in his arguments. Like he couldn't trust his own faculties unless there was a benevolent God who wouldn't deceive him into thinking that his faculties were reliable when in fact they weren't. So I don't think he had a good argument in the end to avoid skepticism. I don't think he really found that solid, rock solid foundation to build upon. And then there was increasing skepticism over the following centuries. And you had someone like David Hume a couple centuries later who was denying the existence of the self and denying objects being permanent, like they're just bundles of sensations that could fly apart at any moment. So, a rock is just, it could turn into a snake. There's nothing that rationally justifies our thinking that it's going to persist. We're just kind of lazy, and we have this habit of thinking that things are going to endure, but really there's no rational basis for thinking that the world is composed of these stable entities. There's no basis for something like induction. Hume famously attacked the use of induction as a valid means of knowing the world. But of course, science depends tremendously on induction. That is, forming general principles from particular observations. Newton came up with these vast laws that apply to the entire universe based on his limited experience. He used his mind to extrapolate from like the fall of an apple from a tree to, the same thing is going on when the moon is going around the earth, or I don't know exactly the steps in his reasoning, but he extrapolated from his experience to the entire universe, and he formulated these universal laws of motion. But that process of inducing from these particular instances is illegitimate according to Hume's philosophy. Um, so there was increasing skepticism, and then Kant, he was trying to answer Humean skepticism, and he came up with a system. Um, but his system, I think, was motivated partly to, at least partly, maybe primarily to save religion. He said he denied knowledge in order to make room for faith, something like that was his statement in the preface to the Critique of Pure Reason. And then you had a wave of irrationalism in the 19th century, um, German philosophy, people like Hegel. Um, and then following that irrationalism, you had the horrors of 20th century Nazi Germany, for instance. So Western civilization has gone up and down in terms of its respect for reason. There's been eras of irrationality and then eras of rationality. And Ayn Rand um, is part of the rational camp. Certainly, in my view, she answered Kant and developed a rational ethics, one that does not depend on religious faith. And according to her ethics of rational self-interest, um, we should live for our own sakes, pursue our own happiness, and if the world at large accepts this philosophy, and we have on a cultural scale or on a national scale, we have a nation of self-interest, going back to the conversation earlier about national self-interest. If we apply our ethics of rational egoism on a broader scale, then it will have much better outcomes for the entire world. We won't have events like 9/11. Israel, if it's rationally self-interested, if it doesn't turn the other cheek and if it doesn't love its enemy, as the mystical Christianity religion would have it do, then it can proudly stand up and defend itself and finally do away with the terrorist threat that's been plaguing it for decades. So whether you have a rational, egoistic philosophy is a matter of life and death, extremely important, crucial to your own happiness as an individual and to the ability of any individual to flourish in a nation. All right, so there's there's a bit about reason and faith and how they've interacted in history. And let me come back to see if there's any new messages in the chat before I end this stream. Let's see. Some from Hree. Uh, um, and Jason. Where did I leave off? Okay, I think I found out at okay, 2:33 Pacific is the last comment I was up to. Jason says, an honest religious person says God cannot be proven. It must by definition be accepted by faith. There, maybe it varies in like Thomas Aquinas, he gave arguments for, I think he had 5 arguments for the existence of God. Um, so now you might say there are just rationalizations in that he independently believes on faith and maybe he thought he needed reason as well. Maybe he thought there was independent ways of knowing there's a God. You could just believe it on faith, but you could also believe it on the basis of reason. But if the two came into conflict, then I think he might have said that you should go with the reason rather than faith. So Aquinas was trying to reconcile Aristotelianism with Christianity, which I don't think can be done ultimately, but I think he at least tried to do that. So maybe he thought there's multiple ways of knowing there's a God. I'm not sure. I'd like to learn more about Aquinas. And then Jason says, faith as in faith in another person is a colloquial term for confidence in. Yeah, sometimes the faith has different senses. That's true. In the context of talking about it in philosophy, um, where there's a discussion of means of knowledge, then I think that's where the definition that I gave is relevant. Faith meaning believing something without evidence, in the absence of evidence. But yeah, there are other senses of it, like arguing in good faith is a different sort of sense. I mean, it's being honest. I'm not trying to deceive. So the context is important for how we should understand the meaning of these terms. And then Hari says, I have, quote, faith I would wake up tomorrow. I may not, but I think I would. And let's see. Oh, Solomon. We have Solomon's a new person in the chat. Hello, Solomon. He says David Hume, the consistent atheist. And then, according to the logical conclusion, excuse me, according to the logical conclusions of the atheistic worldview, not his philosophy. I guess you mean David Hume, the consistent atheist. He's consistent according to the logical conclusions of the atheistic worldview, not his philosophy. Um, and then Marx says a thought on Kant saving, quote, saving religion, unquote. Any interest in Marxist philosopher Althusser trying to do something similar by means of, quote, universalist Marxism, unquote. Maybe a future stream. I haven't heard of Althusser. Uh, he's a Marxist philosopher trying to do something similar to Kant, who was saving religion or trying to save religion. Probably going to be a long time, I would guess, until I get to that, unless someone like brings it up on stream. Um, I mean, I might have some more like thoughts off the top of my head later, but probably not going to research it anytime soon myself, unless someone pays me. If you want to pay me to research a topic and then comment on it, I would consider doing that. But just on my own, that would be kind of like a super chat, which I don't have yet until I get 1,000 subscribers. So thanks for helping me get up to 1,000. Um, but yeah, in the meantime, probably not going to be researching this topic. It's sort of far afield from my interests at the moment, at least. And then Mark says there's also quite a nasty rabbit hole between religion and Marxism, the Carbonari and Illuminati of 18th century Europe, trying to, quote, revolutionize society, unquote, or unquote, internal religion. Um, Louis Althusser, I might try next time. Do I have a Patreon? I do have a Patreon. Yes. Thanks for asking. I do have a Patreon. It's linked on my YouTube channel. So it's just my name, I think, Dan Norton. If you go on Patreon, maybe I should put a link to that chat. Actually, no, actually, I think there already is a link in the description under this video. Let me just confirm that. Yeah, I think I have a link to both my PayPal and my Patreon. Uh, Page is loading. More. Yeah, it's there. Maybe I should put it in the chat here also. And hopefully that'll turn it into a hyperlink because it doesn't show up as a hyperlink in the description, but actually maybe. Okay, I think I'm going to do it this way to make sure it shows up as a link. There we go. Okay, copy, paste. Okay, there it is. I just put my link to Patreon in the chat. So if you want to become a monthly supporter, I definitely appreciate it. Any amounts is definitely welcome and appreciated. And let me also put my PayPal link in there. Maybe I'll try this link a little differently. Okay. See, that one doesn't show up as a link, a hyperlink, because I don't have the anyways, it's I won't try to fix it now. But yeah, those are my links, and I definitely appreciate any financial support. Um, and eventually, I want to make this channel self-sustaining. I do some other things right now to make money, pay the bills. But if I get enough money through this channel, then I won't have to do those other things. I can just do this channel, spend more time promoting Ayn Rand's ideas and changing the world, making it a better place for you and me. All right. So thanks everyone for coming by. I think I'm going to end the stream now. We're coming up on the 2 hour mark, which is usually about where I end it. Um, and I'm glad we had 2 calls today and some engagement in the chat. I plan to do another stream on Wednesday, probably around the same time, around 1 p.m. Pacific. That's been my usual time, Wednesdays and Saturdays. But if you are subscribed, you'll get a notification for exactly when I go live, because sometimes it does vary a bit. All right. Thanks everyone for coming by, and have a good rest of your weekend. All right. Bye-bye.